just jump in. Uh, Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's Almani, aka Mr. Viney, and I felt the need to come on today because earlier today I wrote a post. Well, let me tell a story. I was on a good friend of mine's Facebook page, and he posted a picture, uh, basically in response to what the president had told the Proud Boys, which was, stand back and stand by. I got what the t-shirt was trying to say, but then at the very end of it, it says, I am not my ancestors. And this is not the first time that t-shirts that are created to talk about black resistance or black willingness to resort to force to defend, to legally defend against aggression, has had that term, I am not my ancestors. I don't want to talk about the rest of the shirt. And today is not a debate about use of force to defend oneself or not. As a matter of fact, that's kind of logical. Somebody comes after you or your family, yeah, defend yourself, right? That's a no-brainer. But we have to talk about this notion of I am not my ancestors, because there's something on a conscious level and subconscious level very problematic about how we, one, view our people, view the ancestors and elders that are African American and then greater of African descent. And two, our real understanding of our history. And as a matter of fact, I posed this question for those of you that believe in the shirt, or for those of you that believe in that narrative, even if you're a cultivator of that, where are you getting that from? Right? Where are you getting that from? So let's break this down. If I was a doctor and that shirt was a patient, and the term I am not my ancestors is the problem, and we had to locate the source of it, I would have to say that the source comes from the civil rights movement, and particularly the nonviolent movement, civil rights nonviolent movement under Martin Luther King. Okay. But let's put that into context. The civil rights movement, the nonviolent movement part, the King's adaptation of Gandhi's Satyagraha, is really only 8 to 10 years in length, right? So let's make sure we're understanding this. It only existed in practice for 8 to 10 years, and I'm actually being kind of generous in that time span. The other thing is that, and this is sometimes what's forgotten about the civil rights movement, is that the civil rights movement in and of itself was a regional Southern movement. So really, the states of Georgia, up through the Carolinas is really the concentration of where the civil rights movement, in terms of the practice of nonviolence, really takes place. Of course, interstate, with the Freedom Riders as well. But once again, that does not account for close to 400 years of Black resistance to enslavement, oppression, systemic racism. That does not account for the actions and movements in other parts of the country. And even in the South, it doesn't account for pre-nonviolent practice and post-nonviolent practice. It doesn't even account for the shift in Martin Luther King's ideology after 1965 and really into 1966. And I tell anybody, go ahead and just go on YouTube and take a look at the clip of I'm Black and I'm Proud by Martin Luther King. So, from a historical standpoint, this idea of let's get into what's that message say? I'm not my ancestors. I'll get to questions and comments in a second, but what does that say? It's saying that our African American ancestors and elders were weak, were compliant, were fearful, and dare say cowardly. Once again, when you talk about the innuendo in terms of I'm not my ancestors, as if our ancestors sat there and took on the brutality and did nothing. For anyone that believes that, let me be very clear. You are subscribing to Eurocentric history. You are being very lazy with your understanding with African American history. For example, when we talk about slave revolts or slave rebellions in the United States of America, the first person I guess will pop in your head is Nat Turner. Fine. The problem is then that assumption is that Nat Turner was the only one to hold a revolt. Did you know that there were over 250, close to 300 slave revolts and slave rebellions in the United States of America? So imagine if history textbooks noted and documented the 250 different slave revolts and slave rebellions. Would we then say our ancestors was complicit, fearful, cowardly in pushing back against their oppression? No, we wouldn't. But of course, as you know, that's left out. Post-enslavement, Reconstruction. Sure, we see the images of lynchings, and of course we know of the riots and African Americans being run off land. But you think not that there was not resistance? Let me give my own story here of my own ancestors and elders. Black Wall Street. So my last name is Viney. I kept my mother's maiden last name, who's Angela Viney. My grandfather was Leroy Viney. He's from Stringtown, Oklahoma. Well, in Oklahoma is probably the largest concentration between Stringtown, within Oklahoma City, and Tulsa, the largest population of African Americans with the last name Viney. So we have a significant amount of our family that lives from my grandfather's side in Tulsa. And of course, yes, put two and two together. My family was involved in Black Wall Street. Well, one of my grandfather's relatives, I believe it was his brother-in-law, shot and killed 3 white men who were trying to attack my family. They had to hide him out for several years because of that. So what's the point? Though Black Wall Street fell, though Tulsa at that time fell, if the assumption is that just a bunch of marauding white men that came in and ran over the town and black people just ran away out of fear without putting up a fight, that is a false narrative. They fought. They lost. But then what do you do when the United States Army actually attacks a city? But they fought. Many African American communities that had to push back against racism and law enforcement and the KKK, so forth and so on, and especially in the South, did take up arms, did defend themselves. All it takes is one, talking to your elders, or two, picking up a history book that's not written by someone with Eurocentric ideas or values, where there's an intentionality to keep that out of the textbook. And I'll explain that in a second. But once again, even if you go further, let's go to the 1960s. Come on. I want to make a caveat too, because there's strength in the nonviolent movement. There's strength in turning the other cheek. Nobody was a punk. No one was cowardly. And the fact that we look at them in disrespect, look at them as shame, how dare us? How dare us look at someone that had the guts to say, I will stand at and sit at a lunch counter table and I will take them beatings for my people, for the greater good. You cannot be a coward and do that. So let's also talk about how that narrative diminishes what nonviolent movement did. So let's get that out the way. But going forward, there were always movements from the ones we know, like the Black Panther Party movement, of course, in the West, of course, in the Midwest, in terms of the Nation of Islam, and also the other Black Panther parties that moved up, as well as other groups that were pushing and were good with using force to push back and fighting back. So once again, here you have, in every part of history, are well documented historical events of African Americans or people of African descent or Africans in America that routinely pushed back, fought back, rebelled, and revolted with the use of force against racist aggression. So the idea of creating a t-shirt that renders every one of those stories invisible, that actually, in the irony of ironies, takes on and adopts the Eurocentric racist narrative of Black people being helpless, amazes me. Because that's the only way. Now, I want anybody that's reading that shirt, ask yourself really, where'd you get that idea from? What confirmed that idea that I am not my ancestors? History book, television was promoted there. Who sets the narrative for African Americans? Who sets the narrative for what we highlight and what we celebrate? Have you ever stopped and thought about that? Once again, if you go back to Cecil Rhodes and David Livingstone and all of them, they made it a point way before enslavement. When they first went to Africa, they made it a point to make sure that Africa, or any of us that are descendants of Africa, that no major accomplishment should ever be given to us. If you read history textbooks, whether it be United States or whether it be world, rebellions and revolutions are consistently highlighted, amplified, and celebrated as achievements. The American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Glorious Revolution, 7 Years' War, the Bolshevik Revolution, the Chinese Revolution. And they are all highlighted as turning points and shifts in these countries. But interestingly enough, the revolutions of people of the African diaspora are left out. Maybe a tiny bit with Ethiopia pushing back against Italy. But other than that, we're footnotes. Now, I know somebody's about to say, for example, well, what about the Haitian Revolution? My good brother, Thayar Vanel, talked about that. Let's take the Haitian Revolution because I think that actually makes the point. I'll get to the comments later. My laptop's over there. Just allow me for right now to just speak my truth, my opinions. And then by all means, we can delve into conversation. But the Haitian Revolution really, in a sense, sums up, in my opinion, the Eurocentric urgency to make sure that people of the African diaspora are never credited with independence through revolution nor rebellion. Thomas Jefferson, during the time of the American Revolution, highlighted and said the blood of the patriot. I'm paraphrasing here, but the blood of the patriot serves as the movement of the freedom for America, freedom of the colonies from British tyranny. He believed in revolution. They believed in revolution. They believed in rebellion. But when the Haitian Revolution began, he wrote everything to try to push back and make sure it did not happen. Why? Out of fear that the Haitian Revolution would inspire Africans in America, in the colonies, thus then African Americans, to rebel as such. And what happened? The Haitian Revolution, though successful, is still but a footnote in U.S. history textbooks. Now you may say, what do you mean? No, they do a page or two. Really? Do they really credit the fact that the entire central region of the United States of America, the Missouri Compromise, the purchase of the land from Napoleon, is a direct result of the French losing Haiti to the Haitians? Napoleon needed money in his fight against European countries of Germany and Great Britain and, of course, Russia. Once he lost control of Haiti, he also lost control. Remember, the Midwest, the middle of America, was French owned. He sold that land to America. That does not happen if the Haitians do not defeat the French. So, but yet, are the Haitians, and is the Haitian Revolution credited for being responsible for the United States of America looking geographically as it does today? No. It's rendered invisible. And if we're talking world beyond the Haitian Revolution, do we talk about the slave revolutions in Cuba? Do we even touch upon the Maroons of Jamaica? There's very little discussion and talk about any true revolution or rebellion, no matter how large or small, whether it be in the United States or beyond. It's rendered invisible from the textbooks. Why? Because you can't inspire that. You can't inspire people to do that. Even though for most groups, for most cultures that received their freedom and independence, it came through rebellion and revolution. So what do you have to do instead? Create and cultivate a narrative that is paternalistic in nature, one that reinforces movements without violence, movements, I don't even like the word violence, movements without rebellion, movements without revolution, so that the narrative of complicity and weakness stay. And so recognize, to all my so-called woke, pro-Black power, stand tall people that wear those shirts, nobody gives a damn about the fact that you standing tall versus the Proud Boys. Okay, that's fine. Salute to you. But that line, I am not my ancestors, you are reinforcing the Eurocentric narrative that you've been fed, because you've rendered invisible your people, timeline, and truth. And truth. You've rendered it invisible. You think you're showing respect to your people when in truth, you're spitting on them. It's showing, and I might be ruffling some feathers. I don't know. I'll look at the comments in a second, and maybe I'm about to get killed in the comments, whatever. But you're showing your limitations of the depth of knowledge that you have about your people and the history of your people when you wear that shirt. When you wear that statement that says, I am not my ancestors. Sorry, I am. My elders, my descendants defended their families. I am. My elders, my descendants revolted on plantations. I am. I am my ancestors. And in African countries, my descendants fought against European imperialism. I am. You deny your ancestors. You deny your identity. And when we talk about Black identity, it's something I'm going to teach about in the course when my course launches, is about the power of identity and the power of history. This right here shows the problem when one does not really understand one's history, is that you begin to adapt false narratives. When you adapt false narratives, you adapt false perceptions. Well, when you adapt false perceptions, you then cultivate your actions and your ideologies on those. So it does influence how you look at your ancestors, how you look at your elders, how you speak about them, how you teach your children. So, I'm not my ancestors, really? No. Yeah, we are our ancestors. Our ancestors were strong. Our ancestors were rebellious. They were revolutionary. They pushed back. They had strong spines. Some, yes, used the method of nonviolence, which was a strong method, but others used the method of force and rebellion. There's nothing wrong with neither. In history textbooks for every other country where it's highlighted and celebrated, proves that there's nothing wrong with it. You cannot have a national anthem that everybody says stand for. That national anthem is built around, and the Rockets regular, it's built around rebellion and revolution. So you cannot tell one group that rebellion and revolution is wrong, but yet with everyone else to highlight. I think I even said this before on here one time. If you look at the French Revolution and you look at Bastille Day, and Bastille Day is considered the day of independence for the French, anybody that study history knows that on Bastille Day, the French ran up into, Bastille was a prison. They ran up into that prison and cut the heads off the officers and shoulders and marched them around on pikes. And that's considered a day of independence and celebration. So let's cut this out. Let's stop this. There's nothing proud about wearing those shirts. There's nothing reaffirming in blackness about wearing those shirts. You do your ancestors, you do the elders, you do all the people that fought, that died, that spilled blood, that stood up against racist and Eurocentric aggression towards Black people, African Americans, and those of the African diaspora. You do them a disrespect and a disservice by wearing that damn shirt. Have the courage and read up on your history so that you can fully embrace rather than reject your ancestors. All right, I'm going to look at these comments if there are some, and if not, then I'm going to close off for today. Give me a second here. I'm just looking at comments. All right, so the chat or the comment area here is nothing, but here, let me just see. What's up, E. Gibbs? What's going on, people? Yeah, Ben, you're right. We need to acknowledge it. Look, we absolutely need to acknowledge this. Why we don't, why we fall for it. Like, I guess, look, my thing is this. Why didn't anyone just stop and ask the question? What up, Chris? Hey, Brandy, just look up. You'll see. I've been on for a little bit. But why didn't anybody stop and ask the question? Is there something wrong with us talking about we're not our ancestors? Is there something wrong with us talking about that not my ancestors? Like let's really talk about that. Nobody stopped. And what does that say about us where we grasp? And before anybody even says, and listen, you talk about ruffle, I'm gonna ruffle some feathers right now. And I'm gonna ruffle feathers by saying this. How many of you guys, when you saw either that shirt or you saw the shirt says, "Don't let your president get your ass whipped. Sign these hands. I am not my ancestors." How many of you quietly found more of your adrenaline rush? Or how many people, I don't want to say you because I don't want to put that on no one. How many people got their adrenaline more rushed from that last part? I am not my ancestors. If we do some real mirror introspection, you would know that that's an issue. Excuse me for 1 second. Hello. You ready? Oh, okay. This is my daughter. She's just looking. So, I told you I'm going to be free flowing, nothing formal here. But that is, I'm sorry, that is a problem. But let's go ahead. I'm just going to look through comments here, because I've really just I've really just said all I needed to say about this. You know, I would recommend anybody, look at history. You know, please look. Read up on your history. Nat Turner was not the only one to rebel in America. Take blackness out of it for a second. The nature of human beings is to be free and independent. So rebellion is actually a natural response to oppression. So you mean to tell me the millions of people of African descent, of black people, of Africans in America, you mean to tell me that every single one of them just said, "Up, put the chains on me. Oh, I'm good." Oh, out of what? 4 million? Oh, yeah, Nat Turner, he's the only one. Come on, y'all. It's a simple Google search. Read up on John Henry Clark. You can't go talking about, oh, the man's his story. Oh, it's his story. Cool, I get that. And then wear a shirt like that. You can't. That's a contradiction. You fell for it. It's flatly wrong. It's historically incorrect. Right, Rosemary. Yeah, our I'm cautious about the vowing. Rosemary, I see what you're saying about black males vowing not to vote. I'm cautious with that because once again, I'm sorry, I'm going to say that's another. We have to be cautious of false narratives, and you know I love you, but just as we have we stopped. I want to ask a broader question, to everybody. Have we stopped and paused to wonder why we accept very comfortably and naturally false generalized narratives about ourselves? So here's the one about ancestors. But I've seen, the narrative about black males. Black males aren't voting. I'm a part of a black fraternity, and do you know how many chapters and of us are donating, have a PAC, are mobilizing people to vote? We run the largest youth leadership program in the country with Kappa League. You know how many chapters got our Kappa Leaguers, young black males out there mobilizing people to vote? But we don't amplify those stories. We routinely accept this one loudmouth black dude that says, "I'm voting for Trump," or this one group or small group of black men that says, "I'm not voting." And we render invisible the 10 or 15 young Kappa Leaguers or Sigma Beta Club or Black Boy Scouts or just young black teens just out there doing it and signing people up to vote. So we got to be careful of these narratives that's negative about us that we just so easily accept and promote. I remember the narrative back in the day about, oh, there are more black people in jail than college. Remember that one? It was false. It was false. But we accepted it. We preached it to the choir. We sat on panels on it. We wrote dissertations on it. And yet, when we took a step back and looked at all the boring data, found out it was false. There are more black people in college than jail. This is one about, I think for African Americans, I think this is a come to Jesus moment with us, which is we have to sit and ask ourselves, why are we so comfortable accepting false narratives about ourselves, putting them out there without taking the time to question them? I really think we need to take a step back and really ask ourselves that question. I am not my ancestors. Black men don't do this. Black women are this. Black youth are in gangs and running out crazy. Our net worth is zero. We have accepted such a deficit-based negative narrative as the dominant narrative about us. Psychologically speaking, that's the what is it? That's the what's this? Right? Half empty, half full. If we're always psychologically speaking looking at the narrative of African Americans as half empty, that means and we don't look at the water that we have. That means psychologically speaking, we're always complaining about how thirsty we are. We're constantly thirsty. We don't have enough. We're going to die of thirst. Half full. This is hope. This is positivity. This is moving us forward. This is health. This is fullness. What happens if we render invisible the half-empty part and look full? That doesn't mean complacency. That means we have something to build off of. That means we understand that we have something and that we're strong. We have to stop playing the half full, half empty, or always looking at what we're not. Because who set that narrative up? Who's writing that narrative? Are we really writing that narrative, or are we being parrots and pushing out a narrative that reinforces the false notion of inferiority within Black communities or Black history, so forth and so on? Right? Let me take a look at a couple other questions. Give me 1 second. Dang. Y'all are writing over here. I think part of the issue, Chris, you say part of the issue is we've been conditioned to believe that historically we fought back by fleeing, right? Any acts of physical is inherited. Yeah. Of course listen, listen, I'm still uncomfortable about the whole promoting my course, right? Sound like a salesman. Well, if you take my course, but I'm going to jump the shark and say something. I'm going to jump the shark. The theme for the fall of my course is the African American experience, a study in the African diaspora. Because when we look at our issues, we look at them in a silo of simply what happens here in America. And we detach ourselves from the broader history of the African diaspora in Africa. When you put the puzzle together, you're going to see that a lot of our issues are literally microcosms of a greater problem across the diaspora. You got to connect those. Because they're not just rendering invisible revolutions here. They've rendered invisible revolutions throughout Africa. Once again, the only one we really know about is Ethiopia. talked a little bit about Shaka Zulu, but come on. You don't think they suppressed the slave revolutions in Brazil? How many West Indians outside of Jamaicans, and how many Jamaicans even operated to Jamaican students that knew nothing about the Maroons of Jamaica? I've taught Jamaican students that knew nothing about the Maroons of Jamaica. So we need to, before we write, before we post, before we push send on the next thing that's negative about quote unquote our ancestors and not fighting back, black men not voting, black men not doing this, black men in jail, black women this, black women that, black children this, black children that, black people this, black. Pause. People, stop. And really ask yourself, where'd you get that from? How come that one gangbanger becomes representative of all black people versus that one black scholar? Why are we so apt to have long-winded debates about that one in the black community and bypass 100 celebrations of achievement? This is all connected. It's absolutely and 100% all connected. So I'm going to close up now. Does anybody have any other comments? Because if not, I'm going to close up. I'm on this wonderful thing of I'm getting the hang. I'm not there all the way yet, but I'm getting the hang of Facebook and streaming. I'm using Restream. I'm getting the hang of it. But look, I'm going to talk about a lot of this in my course. This is why I want to teach this course, because it scares me how many false narratives we've adopted and we've invested in, and we've built our philosophical approach around how we deal with us as black people on. So in closing, I can't tell you not to wear that shirt, but what I ask everybody, please do me a favor. Pause for a bit. Stop for a bit. Ask yourself why. Ask the question why. When narratives and statements are put out, to whom's intentions does it really serve? Who or what really benefits for us adapting, reinforcing, and embracing negative narratives about our people and us? Who does that truly serve? So, all right, I'm signing off. I gotta take my son to band. We can continue to chat. I'll come back and I'll take a look at the chat and everything. I do appreciate everybody that's joined on with me. So, salute to every single one of you. And I hope you like the look. I'm getting there. I'm getting there. African American Experience coming this fall. All right. It's Almani, a.k.a. Mr. Viney, signing off. Peace, love, and peace.